The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Today is Thursday, May 17th. Ben's out today. This is Matt Sienkiewicz, and I'm joined, as always, by Max Inhoff. Hey, Max.
Hello.
So I was featured earlier this week on the show. I did a long interview with Ben about the situation in Gaza. We will address that a little bit today. We're going to have an interview with Richard Goldwasser, who's going to talk to us a bit about the political impact in the United States of the situation in Gaza. I'm going to leave that alone, I think, for now. If you're interested in my perspective on that, you can go back to a couple days ago and find my episode with Ben.
Yeah, it was pretty long, and there was definitely a lot to digest there.
Yeah, there was plenty in that, so I'll leave it alone for now, although, well, hopefully the situation will be as such. We don't need to address it constantly, but I suspect this will be something we'll return to in the future. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to some other stories. Again, we're going to get to Gaza with our interview, and then I dare say we're going to try yet again to bring in Josh Moss for the growingly popular What Blogs Are Saying. But what are you thinking about today, Max?
So yesterday, North Koreans dropped this. Well, Tuesday, North Koreans said they are canceling the talks that were supposed to go on Wednesday with the South Koreans. And today they threatened to completely pull out of the talks in Singapore with Donald Trump that are sometime in the amorphous future.
Are you totally shocked by this?
No. But somehow, yes, because over the past few weeks, North Korea has almost seemed like a sane and rational actor, and all of a sudden they're back to exactly the way they were before. That's almost what it seems like if you're just following the news day to day.
That is a perspectival problem, though, right? Like, that is... So I see what you're saying. A couple of things with that, right? One, I think, and I might be stealing this from something that you told me offline, but we're just so desperate for good news, right? For something that looks like progress, the talks coming did look like something good might be happening. There was no real rationality in it, though. What you saw was the standard Trump, like, radical, crazy swing of like superlatives, following up like these attacks
from both sides.
From both sides, yeah. Well, these people are like, well, it's been long stated, and it remains true that Trump and Kim are just perfect for each other in a lot of ways, right? So, I mean, it was very good that the Americans were released from North Korea. I think that is a sort of, you have to credit that as a good thing that happened under Trump's watch. But then he's standing out there in the tarmac talking about the excellent way in which these people who were held hostage were treated by Kim.
The honorable Kim. Yeah.
Just like, so the swings are just like absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
This was like our one sort of like thread or like beam of like positivity of something that looked like it could be good on the horizon. But did you ever? And who knows? Maybe it still could happen. But we are definitely at a point, and we probably have been here for a long time. You should not be crediting Donald Trump for anything that he says or other people say will happen, right?
Yeah. And nothing has happened. All the underlying variables are still the same, so there's definitely still a possibility that a deal can happen, because North Korea didn't come to the table now for no reason. So it's possible that there is still some progress to be made, but North Korea, when they are threatening to pull out of these talks, are citing the upcoming war practice games, whatever it's called.
Max Thunder?
Yes. Codenamed Max Thunder.
No, this is it's okay. So nothing about any of the stories that we're talking about lately is good at all.
Yeah.
But the fact that the joint U.S. South Korean military exercise is called Max Thunder, which it's like named after like sounds like a failed like Nickelodeon show from 1993.
Yep.
I mean, like did a 6-year-old name this? It's remarkable, right? Max Thunder.
I kind of like it personally, but
that's true. I didn't. Oh, I think Max has a nickname. I think.
Moving on.
Yeah. Well, no, but let's do this for a minute, though, right? So, I'm not saying this is, I don't want to tie it together too closely, right? But the idea of pulling out of negotiations is something that Trump has proven himself to be adept at, right?
Very much so.
I mean, so pulling out of the Iran deal, the week before or whatever. I don't know. Time is impossible for me to judge any longer, right? And so this is a North Korean tactic, which we see over and over again. You look at there's a history of them delaying things, pushing back things, pulling out of things. But Trump has proven that this is his move too. And on the one hand, that's a coincidence. On the other hand, it's not. It's an authoritarian tactic, right? It's a tactic that somebody who wants to show strength without having sort of thought through the ramifications, without having to fall back on a sort of rational kind of like strategic diplomatic action. Like one negotiating tactic, right, is to just leave. Right? I don't. This is going to date me. Do you watch The Office?
Yeah.
It's like when Michael Scott looks up the negotiating tactics on Wikipedia and tries to use them in his salary to go. Just walks out of the room randomly for no reason because the Wikipedia article that he read said that show strength by acting unpredictably. Yeah. Right. That's what we get here, and we have two people who they call each other stupid names. They show complete impatience, and they find these things to be marks of strength. And so you're right. There's an underlying dynamic that says that North Korea needs. It seems like just for sort of their own economic survival, they need to make changes. And Trump certainly could use a win, something to sort of hang his hat on, which isn't throwing gas on the fire like he did in Jerusalem and Gaza. Right? There are underlying dynamics. South Korea has an interest also in solving this.
China, Russia.
China. So you're right. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
But you could hardly put together a worse combination to try to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not only Trump withdrawing from the Iran deal, that's the recent past, but the longer history is the United States invading Iraq, the United States... I mean, even when the North Koreans were threatening to pull out of this, they cited the Libya intervention 5 times in their statement. So they're really saying, we recognize that nuclear weapons are super important for us not to get invaded and destroyed by the United States. And so if Bolton is insisting on complete denuclearization, there's... In that scenario, there's just not really a way forward.
No, and that's a good critique, right? I think it's important and necessary to point to the fact that this dynamic of Trump negotiating with the North Koreans is in and of itself sort of ridiculous and really a problem. But yeah, there's a long history here, and all of America's problems anywhere, let alone in North Korea, they're not Trump originating problems, right? And that is really important. It's just that we have this ugly checkered history, and we're capping it with this.
Couldn't be a worse person to be representing us to try to kind of paper over those terrible paper over the terrible history that we have.
People did seem keen to. Some people, right? This is I hate this because I'm doing a Trump thing. People are saying, right? But there were people who were very at least willing to point very quickly to this being a Trump accomplishment.
Yeah.
And we've learned our lesson a bit, right? Barack Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize for, I guess, giving a speech.
Yeah, getting elected,
and he basically he went to Cairo and didn't use any ethnic slurs, basically. I mean, this is being a little bit limited. He went to Cairo and wasn't George Bush. Maybe that's the way of putting it.
Definitely an improvement, though.
Oh, well, okay, so yes. I mean... By basically, well, and probably from a policy perspective, but certainly there was no achievement by the Obama administration in the Middle East or anywhere else that would approach a Nobel Peace Prize. Anyway, so Obama literally received the award before doing anything. Trump, people I feel like the Nobel watch was on very quickly.
Yeah.
And I get part of that. Part of that is it seems, it's pretty, the joint Korean Olympic team was very surprising and sort of interesting. There's a lot of small things and then, they're going to meet. But a meeting is a hell of a long way from a deal.
Absolutely. And just to go back to this Nobel Prize thing, like Trump said, like, ooh, everybody's saying I should win a Nobel Peace Prize. And that sounds ridiculous to us, but the people who put that out there was kind of the South Korean government, just to kind of prod his ego and make him feel really good about dealing with the North Koreans. So it sounds ridiculous to us, but it's actually South Koreans doing something that I thought was actually fairly clever at the time.
No, it probably was strategic, right? I mean, you know, in some ways they're mocking the award when they do that, right? When you say it's something that Donald Trump really wants. But no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I guess that does make the South Koreans both look clever and sort of like, suggest their priorities are in the right place, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not about a glory hunt for them necessarily. Not that I know anything about the particulars of South Korean politics, but they do seem to be fairly savvy when it comes to this. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, we know that shiny things are important to this president,
especially when they're covered in gold.
Yeah, right. I mean, like we know that this would, I mean, and there don't lie. There was a little piece of you that when you saw this was happening, you're like, oh no, Donald Trump's going to win a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, that's I mean, I guess you could make sort of a broader, like, 10-step argument that it actually would be bad because then he would get a second term, maybe more likely, and in that second term he would, like, whatever.
That is partisanship. That's
for me,
my partisan reaction.
Oh, see, yours is partisan. Mine is, like, personal. It's just like, all of the people, including myself, who could never win important awards, right? And this joker for doing nothing is going to receive it.
Not fair.
Also partisan, I guess. But so you could argue that I guess maybe in the long run it could be a bad thing, but of course it wouldn't be. It would be a good thing if we had an end to the Korean War.
Absolutely, no question about it.
And so we should all be rooting for that, and we should be putting our partisanship and our petty thoughts aside. That said, this pullback by the North Koreans today, not surprising, and even if the meeting does happen, I mean, that is miles and miles away from a substantive change in policy. Yeah,
it looked like things were getting better, and now it looks like things are exactly the same.
All right, Max. So let's hit on some additional current event stories with our next segment, in which I'm going to introduce you as Max Thunder.
Let's do it.
All right, we'll be back in a moment. So I am back with Max Thunder, and I am joined with our, regular guest, recurring guest, and our recurring segment, What Blogs Are Saying with Josh Moss. Josh Moss, a comedian from New York, joins us. Josh, what are blogs saying?
It's been kind of a slow week in blogging, basically. It's kind of been, there's a lot of LeBron talk, there's a lot of Trump talk, but really Trump Jr. is where blogs are talking right now, because today the transcripts were released of when he was talking to he was talking to someone in the government, and they released transcripts, and he misidentified what property Trump actually sponsored, and his response was, quote, "There's a lot of Trumps out there." And so the blogs had a lot of fun.
Like a lot of, what does he mean? That. A lot of Trump people or a lot of Trump properties?
Means that there are so many Trump properties that he could not remember if Trump Soho was properly licensed by the actual Trump organization in specific ways. He just didn't know, and his response when he got something incorrect about Trump Soho was saying, "There's a lot of Trumps out there."
Oh boy!
And this is just, blogs are talking about how just it's another example of this guy has a lot of he's dumb.
That's very succinct. Well, it's not just dumb, right? It's that they have this ridiculous business thing where they put their name on everything, but they don't own anything. They're not responsible for anything. Who knows what's happening in these buildings and the money laundering that's taking place?
It's also, he's supposed to be running the company.
What do you suggest, Josh? What are blogs suggesting?
Well, blogs are also suggesting maybe he's not really running the company as his dad told everyone.
Oh, these blogs are incorrigible. So blogs are saying that Don Trump Jr. is dumb and not running a company. All right, I'll buy that. What else?
Yeah,
are
we
blogs
can move
saying?
on.
Yeah,
actually, another big thing blogs have been talking about the last couple of days was the Yanny and Laurel. Soundbite.
Okay, wait, whoa! Max just gave me a look. Do you not know Yanny Laurel?
No, I have not heard of this actually.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is why we have this segment.
No kidding. Wow. Oh, wow. You are really something. Wow.
Hey, sorry.
Just the cultural illiteracy is, for Max Thunder here is shocking. But Josh, tell us what blogs are saying about Laurel Yanny.
Well, so blogs there's an audio clip going around where to some people it sounds like someone is saying Yanny, and to some people it sounds like they're saying Laurel. And what blogs are actually just saying like Laurel, Yanny, depending on what they hear.
Right. It's
but
like the
one
dress,
blogger
but...
actually, yeah. But I have to say one blogger pointed out that the audio clip, it just depends on like how your stereo is, because he played it on like different types of things in a row, and one clearly sounded like Yanny and one clearly sounded like Laurel.
Yeah.
So it kind of destroyed in a way, like at least.
Yeah, it doesn't seem. It seems like there's a
blog.
technology to it, whereas the dress, what was it, blue or white, right? That dress, it was completely your eyes. That wasn't the screen that was doing it. Here, the Times had an interesting thing where you like played with the bass, and it's pretty remarkable. So, Josh, did you hear Laurel?
I heard Yanny on mine.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I heard Laurel. But the question is this like our ears, or is it the speakers that we're listening on or whatever? The Times had this thing where you pull it in one direction or the other and it changes the bass. And one direction is clearly Laurel and the other extreme it's clearly Yanny. But what was really interesting when I listened was that if you approach it from the Yanny side, it stays Yanny for like over halfway, and if you approach it, like drag it like step by step from the Laurel side, it stays Laurel. So like what your ears are expecting, at least in my experience, was what I was hearing. Did you play with any of those things that were supposed to be able to make you hear both, Josh?
I did, and when it was set to each, I heard each. But when I first heard it, I definitely heard Yanny. Although you know what blogs were not saying. They didn't. Yanny is a much less famous name. I think it's a name, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I couldn't think of any Yannys.
Well, Yanny, the Greek pianist, right?
Oh, it's Yanny. All right, blogs weren't saying that. Greek blogs were off this week. It's Yanny.
Yeah, I think it's Yanny. It could be Yanny. I don't know. I forget. It
comes out as Yanny. It comes out as Yanny, like a nickname for like Yancey Thigpen or something.
It's our first reference to Yancey Thigpen. Do you know who Yancey Thigpen is, Max?
Also no.
He was a wide receiver for the Steelers in the mid-aughts, the early aughts, Josh?
This could be like the late 90s.
Could be the late 90s. Definitely not what this is in reference to. There is something... I think you're right, Josh. Laurel is at least a name that it's like somewhat famous, and whereas Yanny doesn't mean anything. So there's
you also like don't rest on your laurels. There's no don't rest on your Yannies. There's it's just it's when you're set to hear such a strange word, you kind of definitely. I wanted to hear Yanny. I'll be honest.
You wanted to be a Yanny, yeah. It's interesting the extent to which it is your ears, the extent to which it's your speakers. Like I said, I found that if you kept moving the bass away from the Yanny side, it actually stayed Yanny for me longer. Like the middle was basically dependent on what I heard previous to it.
Huh.
And I know Max is so bored by this because it's pretty boring. There was a bunch of other audio things that came out of this that if you know what something says, it's amazing how you can hear it through incredible static. Mm-hmm. Right, so like you first hear it, and it was like I listened to something with just random phrases, and it just sounded like static. But then once it told you what it said, you could hear it clearly. So there's like a fun perception thing.
So blogs think I should listen to this.
Is that what blogs are saying?
Oh yes, blogs are definitely saying to listen to it and give your opinion.
And be pretend angry about it, right? Like Yanny people are the worst. or
yeah,
Yanny
like Team
speakers.
Yanny and Team Laurel. I mean, the problem is that it's already like entered the backlash phase almost. So it's been like 2 days. So that's a long time.
That's a long time in blogs. That is a long time in blogs.
Yeah.
All right, so that's what blogs are saying. I will note that last time we had Josh on, I said that if 2 people reached out and said that they like what blogs are saying with Josh Moss, I would commission a theme song. One person reached out. Somebody else liked the tweet that proclaimed that they liked what blogs are saying, but I'm not going to count that.
Yeah.
I need 2 distinct... I'm going to make it 2 more. I need 2 more people distinctly
2 more?
saying.
That's not fair. You just said 2. Cumulative.
Tell it to the blogs, Josh.
I will.
So we'll see. Thank you for catching us up. We appreciate that, and it's nice. There's so many very serious things going on, and we definitely will treat those with seriousness. But it's nice to have a little break in the middle here to discuss Yanny versus Laurel. So thanks for coming on, Josh, and we're going to kick it now to our interview with Richard Goldwasser, where we'll talk about the ramifications of the situation in Gaza on American politics. Now it's our pleasure to invite onto the Benjamin Dixon Show Richard Goldwasser. Richard is a practicing attorney in Chicago and a longtime activist for the two-state solution. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, Matt.
So we're recording this on Wednesday evening. Still, things have not calmed down on the Gaza border, although, we're not seeing the intensity of violence that we had earlier in the week. We can discuss the actual circumstances if we want to during this conversation. But what I really would like to focus on is what I see as the beginnings of a change in the American political scene as it relates to Gaza, and particularly criticism of Israel. We've seen over the last few weeks, particularly in the wake of the violence on the border, of the death of dozens of Palestinian protesters and other people at the border of Gaza, we've seen the beginnings of some critiques from members of the Democratic Party. So on Friday, actually, before the events of Monday, we saw a letter signed by 13 senators calling on Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, to take actions to resolve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. After the events Monday, Senator Sanders came out with a statement which included a fairly clear rebuke of Israeli tactics. And so the question that I have for you, Richard, should we see these as not much, as sort of small potatoes, or should we see it as a real sea change, something that is fundamentally different given the lack of any criticism we've seen in the past?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing, not just this week and the week before, but there's been an arc over the past several years of members of Congress who are willing to come out and take a position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You only have to go back a couple months. 102 members of Congress, House members, signed a letter with regard to Gaza when the Trump administration froze the UNRWA funding, which was about $125 million, and demonstrating their concern, or showing their concern of the potential dire consequences and potential for violent flare-ups in Gaza on the border, the kind that we're seeing now. So I think what we saw in the past week is a continuation of an arc. We saw it going back in February, and I think even before that. Probably, if you take a look back to the Iran deal, although that didn't touch on the Palestinian issue, what you saw was the Israeli Prime Minister in 2015 coming to the United States, to Congress, taking on the President of the United States. And I think that at that moment was a big sea change. And I think members of Congress, certainly on the Democratic side, became much more willing to step forward.
So I'm wondering if you guys think that Trump getting elected and Trump having such a strong position on Israel and the politicization that kind of seems to have caused will actually cause any sort of progress, because being anti-Trump is kind of a very popular position. So it kind of forces people to take a position whereas they might not have in a Hillary Clinton presidency. So do you feel like that maybe has had some, or has the potential, or rather is the reason that so many senators are coming out and so many representatives have in the past as well?
Yeah, I think there's something to that, and I think it's a little bit more than that. It's not just the Trump presidency, but it's the Trump alliance with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I think members of Congress are taking a look, and they see the kinds of policies that Trump and Netanyahu are pushing, and it looks like, you know, similar TV shows, one in Hebrew, one in English, you have criminal investigations going on in Israel. You have the special counsel in the United States. In Israel, you have the prime minister who is pushing to deport asylum seekers. In the U.S., you have Trump with his Muslim ban. I mean, you could go on and on. They each take on the press, fighting against the media. And so I think what you're seeing is you're seeing people, members of Congress, who are looking at this alliance as antithetical to their values, to their democratic values with a small d. And so I think what you're seeing is that members of Congress are now going to be more willing to step forward.
And you said with a small d, but with a capital D also. There was a Pew study that came out earlier in the year, and I take some issue with the way the questions were asked, but when they asked people in the Democratic Party if they sympathized more with the Israelis or the Palestinians, it was very close. It was essentially a statistical draw. That is surprising, right? I mean, given the fact that Israel for a long time was sort of a bipartisan issue, that's a real change, right?
Well, I've seen people argue both sides of the Pew study, but I think what's important is there's if you force people to take a position, pro or anti,
I agree.
You're going to get some skewed results.
I totally agree.
I think what you're really seeing certainly is reflected by the political leaders, and I think also in polling, people understand now that you can be pro-Palestinian, which is obviously important in its own right, but being pro-Palestinian also is in the current situation is a necessary precondition to being pro-Israel. For Israel to be a secure democratic homeland, you're going to need a secure and democratic second state of Palestine.
No, I think that's right, and I agree that the question is sort of silly. Nonetheless, the findings are I think they at least remark a change, right, over time. Let me put it to this way and see just what your reaction is. So if we look at the letter that was signed by 13 senators, it was sent Friday. So this is prior to the events of Monday, but there had been plenty of violence over the weeks before that. The strongest it goes towards critiquing Israel is to say that Israel's restrictions on the freedom of movement of people, legitimate goods, and equipment in and out of Gaza have made the humanitarian situation worse. Now, a lot of people see this sort of statement. They see Sanders' statement after Monday, and they say that that's weak, right? That sort of takes the onus off of Israel, even if it points to a small problem. It sort of it does so in a way that seems to diminish it in some way. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the fact that you got 13 senators to put their name to a letter is significant. You can take a look at some of the individual statements that are not contained on this letter. Certainly, Senator Sanders has been much more vocal on the issue than what you see in this letter. Right.
So, what's what another sort of implicit critique or question about this would be: has America given up its place as a potentially useful mediator of the situation at all, right? And there are a lot of people who look at the embassy decision, look at just the trajectory of American attitudes towards Israel and Palestine, and say that sort of the ship has sailed. Does this movement towards at least some part of a major party taking a more critical eye and seeing the for example, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as a real issue, is there still a place for America to play in this process, or have things moved in too far in the other direction?
Well, certainly the Trump administration they've sidelined themselves. Okay, but Trump he's not going to be president forever, and eventually, when we have a new administration, it's going to be important to have congressional support behind him. But before Trump became president, presidents of both parties took an active role in trying to broker a peace agreement, and in a way that was certainly more honest than what we're seeing with this president. So I think it's important that you're seeing both the Senate and the House starting to line up behind these positions. And just to return to the letter again, you made a point that maybe some of the language wasn't as strident as maybe some people would have expected or perhaps wanted to see. I think there's something more important than the tone of the language there, and that's the solutions that are being offered. Okay, we can go back and we could argue over blame and castigate the various parties, or we could try to figure out a way forward. And I think that's what this letter does. Okay, so this letter talks about restoring funding to UNRWA, which the House was addressing in their letter back in February. It talks about easing the blockade. It talks about improving infrastructure and the economy. So I think sometimes certainly in the age of social media, people want kind of punchy statements. But what this letter does is it provides real practical solutions to a dire humanitarian situation.
And just for the clarification, UNRWA is the United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestinian refugees, and the Trump administration has been playing with the funding for that to significant detriment. One of the suggestions is the Gaza seaport, which would be a sort of major infrastructural change, and the goal of it would be to reframe the Gazan economy. Just from your perspective, that looks really good on paper. Doesn't seem like something that the Israelis are likely to look friendly upon. What do you think of the likelihood of a project such as the Gaza seaport?
Well, it actually has support inside Netanyahu's cabinet. One of his ministers has been pushing this. Mm-hmm. You have it's got strong support within the Israeli security establishment.
Yes.
So. There is support at important points in the Israeli government. The question is whether there's going to be political will. The prime minister wields the ultimate say, and at one point he was fond of talking about economic peace. He didn't want to talk about a diplomatic peace. His idea was, well, if you make the Palestinians' lives comfortable enough, they're not going to want or push a political solution for a second state. But as we've seen, this prime minister hasn't pursued a diplomatic peace, and he hasn't pursued an economic peace either.
I mean, given where we are in the context of a Trump term of office, should we look at this letter, look at these statements as simply sort of rays of potential hope down the line in a new administration? Can they have an impact now in the context of the Trump administration's utter disregard for the situation in Gaza, for the peace process, and so on? Is there something we can look at this and say maybe it can help soon, or is it just sort of a keep hope alive situation?
No, I think there. Look, I don't want to hold out any false hope with this administration, but I think the ultimate way out of the current conflagration in Gaza is going to be some easing of the blockade. The people of Gaza, they need clean water, they need electricity, they need food, they need an economy that works. And I think the way out of this, and I think there's already been some negotiations or some indirect contacts with Egypt about perhaps easing the blockade. I think now is a critical point because it could perhaps be sort of a safety valve. I don't anticipate a seaport being constructed overnight or in the next couple of months, but certainly easing of the blockade is going to be a key component.
Do you think that the overwhelming negative attention being pointed at Israel at the moment can this be sort of maneuvered into the sorts of pressures that can push towards the easing of that blockade, or are they more likely to sort of double back and circle the wagons? What do you think the reaction to the extreme negative response on the world stage that's come from the recent events will impact Israel?
I think there's an opportunity for the international pressure to actually succeed this time. If you take a look back at the past rounds, or if you take a look back at the actual Gaza wars in 14 and 12, and I think in 08, there was always some sort of ceasefire agreement which allowed the Palestinians some sort of relief, tiny as it was. So I think Israel and Netanyahu may be looking for a way out of this to they understand in their eye what a terrible PR disaster this has been for them, and that's how they view it. Right. So I'm not. So that would be the motivation here, and I think the international pressure could possibly work this time.
And I want to be clear, you're saying it's a PR disaster from the perspective of the Israeli government, not by no way meaning to minimize the actual violence and death. It's been quite remarkable the way that, at least the way that it's being framed, the Israeli response has been largely to the narrative of it, as opposed to the... Absolutely,
no, correct. Right. My point is simply that the way the Netanyahu government is looking at this is from purely a PR perspective.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just want to make sure that we clarify that completely, because it's been a disturbing trend from a lot of Israeli spokespeople. This is a speculative question, but I think it would indicate to some extent whether or not we're looking at real political change. From your perspective, when we see presidential debates going into the 2020 election, will there be substantive disagreement about Israel on that debate stage? Historically, there haven't been. The candidates, Republicans and Democrats, have gone at it on a number of issues, but never in Israel. Whenever Israel comes up, it's a matter of just who can praise higher. Do you think that in the 2020 cycle we will see a Democratic presidential candidate who challenges Donald Trump or whoever the nominee is on the American relationship to Israel?
I think it's going to depend on who the candidate is. I could see, for example, if it were Bernie Sanders, I think you're going to see that debate. Not so sure if it were, let's say, Cory Booker. I'm not sure you're going to have that debate. I could be wrong, but I think a lot is going to depend on who that candidate is.
But the fact that it's even a possibility does seem to be a sign of change.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. How can people find you online?
Online, you could find me on Twitter. My handle is @ _Goldwasser_.
Very good. We'll tag you when we put this up on Twitter. Thank you very much for joining the show tonight.
Thank you once again.
So that's going to do it for today's Benjamin Dixon Show. I want to thank Josh for coming on and telling us what blogs are saying. If you want to hear a theme song, reach out, and we need two more listeners for that. I also want to thank Richard Goldwasser for coming on and talking us through some of these political aspects of the situation in Israel and Palestine. I want to thank Max for joining us and joining me. Max, thanks for co-hosting.
Yeah, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Maximillionaire.
I am at Media Studied, and we'd love to hear from you. So thanks for listening, and Ben will be back tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Thank you.